Two attackers ran towards 7 men standing at a base. Only one of the pair was armed, the other was busy throwing stones while the others ran. A sniper hid in the middle of the mountains. He and the spotter planned the attack against the enemy bunkers. On the rooftops, terrorists walked freely through the cities, committing serial murders of security forces. This was all part of a conflict in which terrorist and government agents fought each other in the desert and in the cities, resulting in the deaths of hundreds of thousands of civilians. It was the country where terrorist groups flourished, cultivating misery and hunger. The conflict in Yemen is considered the world's worst humanitarian crisis by the United Nations. It's a place where the horsemen of the apocalypse roam with a smile, undisturbed by the dramatic marches of young people with selective conscience. In that country, a complex drama has been unfolding for more than 8 years. The origins of the civil war go back to 2014 when the Houthi rebels backed by Iran took over the capital Sana'a. In 2015, corruption. The coalition led by Saudi Arabia intervened militarily in support of President Abdurrahman Mansour Hadi's government, intensifying the conflict and plunging the country into a cycle of violence. The conflict in Yemen is multifaceted, with several armed groups and many political agendas at play. In addition to the Houthis and the Hadi government, jihadist groups such as the Islamic State and Al-Qaeda also operate in the country, exploiting the chaos. Chaos is instability to strengthen their presence. The sectarian tensions between Shia and Sunni present in the region for centuries also fuel the conflict, creating an environment of division and distrust. The Houthis are part of a Shia branch, while much of the south, where the rulers came from, belongs to a Sunni movement. The civil war has caused a humanitarian devastation in Yemen, with thousands of civilians killed, victims of airstrikes, bombings, shootings, and landmines. Millions of people have been forced to leave their homes, becoming internally displaced or seeking shelter in neighboring countries. The crisis of hunger and disease is severe, with millions of Yemenis in urgent need of humanitarian aid. The country's infrastructure has been severely damaged, with lasting impacts on the economy and the lives of the population. After years of conflict, the only winners were the warlords, who celebrated battle after battle to sell weapons to the country. The peace negotiations mediated by the United Nations did not reach a definitive agreement, and the situation on the ground remained volatile. The international community sought solutions to the crisis, but the divergent interests among the countries involved, particularly Saudi Arabia and Iran, disputed the peace process. Like the international community, he said, only small groups whose memory sometimes brings back recollections of those forgotten lands. In general, it is a conflict with almost 400,000 dead, with more than 100,000 children dying of hunger, with minors taking up arms and being mutilated. To make matters worse, evil attracted the chaos of Yemen, and the competing branches of Islam fueled the idea that Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State could settle there. Both groups started looking for recruits and gained prominence in several positions, attacking the government or the Houthis indiscriminately. The situation in the country was so chaotic that the terrorist group Al-Qaeda was just one more group maintaining its bases in the mountains. Used to fanaticism within the organization, they were surprised when 2 Houthis attacked 7 of their men in a blind rage. One of the men approached with his weapon, firing ammunition in a range of action that made the opponents either run or hide. His companion, unarmed, picked up stones from the ground to throw at men who could retaliate with bullets. The Houthi armed gained confidence and ran toward the opponents, taking enough shots to his chest to throw him to the ground. His companions saw where the shot came from and threw his stones in vain. At a certain moment he seemed to flee, but he came back to recover the fallen one. He ran with his finger pressing the trigger until he made contact with his companion's killer. In the midst of the dust and gunfire, both were consumed by death. Al-Qaeda is best known for its association with Osama bin Laden, the September 11, 2001 terrorist attack, and the Taliban. However, its branches are spread throughout the Middle East and Africa, with one of the most active in Yemen. Al-Qaeda is in the Arabian Peninsula. The organization was responsible for the terrorist attack on the United States ship Cole in October 2000 in Aden, killing 17 American sailors. The idea of the halt to block the Red Sea was already old and was proposed by the leader of Al-Qaeda, Saeed Ali al-Shiri, who called for a regional holy war and the blockade of the Red Sea. To prevent shipments from Israel, Yemen declared open war on the organization, facing the simultaneous challenges of a Shiite insurgency in the north and militant separatists in the south. The conflict intensified during the Yemeni Revolution of 2011 as the jihadists took control of the Abiyan region. Subsequent waves of violence erupted in 2000 when militants expanded their territory in the southwest amid intense clashes with government forces. On September 16, 2014, a large-scale civil war broke out when Houthi fighters took Sana'a, overthrowing interim President Hadi and splitting the Yemeni government between the United Nations, recognized government, and the newly formed Supreme Political Council of the Houthis. This civil war facilitated the growth of Islamic groups such as Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State and spurred calls for the separation of southern Yemen. Al-Qaeda's hostility toward the northern rebels, known as the Houthi, began early on. The soldiers of the terrorist group moved quickly through the desert without the need. The men got out of the vehicle wearing traditional clothes. All they had was an automatic Kalashnikova and a desperate fanaticism to charge at a Houthi outpost, shooting, leaving no chance for a reaction. For the cornered young man, it was a basic strategy, with one exposed man suppressing the target while the other sneaked up and raised the automatic Kalashnikova. With the storm of gunfire, the field was looted and the position was taken. The roads filled with improvised explosives, destroying the pickup trucks that carried the Houthis' heaviest weapons. Many deaths were a personal horror. The jihadists knew how to spread terror, approaching checkpoints with their pickup trucks and shooting at men who thought they were only seeing civilians traveling. They spread fear across the desert, taking over entire convoys and capturing resources to be sold to finance their cause. That's how they gained ground until they were able to invade urban centers. The city of Taiz was taken by the Houthi in 2015 and became a battleground between them and the government. Al-Qaeda got involved and made things even worse. Their rocket-propelled grenade 32s blew up government buildings, firing 105mm warheads. Civilians and soldiers were thrown. They were shot at in the buildings. The mortars undermined the Houthis' initial defenses, opening the way for bolder attacks, with men approaching windows to force a rocket-propelled grenade visit. Soon after, the corners started to be taken, with AKs appearing over the walls. With successive and aimless gunfire, these men started making their way through tough fights in the alleys of what was once the country's cultural capital. They fired towards any window, since the place would later earn the nickname City of Snipers. From a corner, a grenade was thrown, and since it was spotted in time, the soldiers were able to run. Their luck didn't last forever. While crossing one of the streets in a desperate run, the same man was struck by a sniper's bullet. It was thanks to his sacrifice that others managed to infiltrate the houses and set up positions with heavy weapons. The pickup trucks took over the streets, which had been cleared of snipers, to enter into combat. Taiz was devastated by so many heavy weapon shots and bombings, but the Houthi managed to drive Al-Qaeda away. The group began to focus its forces to the south, but by 2022 they were already weakened. The American MQ-9 Reaper drones went into action, eliminating at least 14 of Al-Qaeda's leaders in the region. That's right. The terrorism of the Islamic State reached its peak fame in 2014. It was in that same year that the organization set up a branch to spread death and violence in Yemen. Their recruitment was fast, even competing with Al-Qaeda. The conflicts between the two groups decreased from 2015 onward. But Islamic State of Iraq and Syria directed the entire wave of terror against civilians, the Houthis, and the government, with many attacks against Shia mosques. Their men began carrying out quick assassinations in broad daylight, getting out of cars to find their targets, distracted in their routines. The shootings happened in full view of witnesses, with some breathing a sigh of relief when the killer spared them. The victims were well identified and observed. The cars turned into traps, consuming the men with fire. Considered obstacles to the Islamic State, the Houthis became the main enemy of the jihadists. They stormed the enemy positions in the Kaifa Mountains and launched an offensive in Al-Qaeda in 2020. The jihadists held positions at the top of the mountains, which forced the attackers to stay squeezed between the rocks. Further down, a rocket-propelled grenade hit one of the first defense points, and one of the jihadists barely escaped in the midst of the dust. This attack made the men duck between the rock walls. The Houthis climbed quickly, beginning the strategy to encircle the Islamic State base. The attacks were carried out against each peak, and because of the attackers' position, the defenses couldn't support each other. Isolated, they watched as the rocks were climbed and the men threw grenades. The explosive burst bitterly among the jihadists. One of them jumped for his life, but the other took a hit to the chest, everywhere. The remaining man still tried to defend himself, but alone he couldn't stop them. With the Houthis approaching, the last defender carried the banner of the terrorist group that has caused so many deaths around the world. The Houthis also learned to cause terror, and they climbed the hill head-on. One of the defenders stood up too much and was hit by the attacker's shot. Wounded, he was cornered. While the others tried to prevent the siege, grenades started exploding under the fluttering flag of the Islamic State. Stunned, wounded, and shot, the jihadists fell, with AKs firing between the rocks, and the banner of the Islamic State fell. The Al-Qaeda offensive ended with the death of Emir Abu al-Walid Adani, eliminating the largest Islamic State of Iraq and Syria stronghold in Yemen. The Houthis' problems were so diverse within Yemen that the war seemed unlikely to spread beyond there. They had already hit areas of Saudi Arabia with ballistic missiles a few times, but that was one of their farthest targets. The battle on the borders with the neighboring monarchy was intense, with a succession of victories that maintained the rebel group's control. In the north, the Houthis' resources were growing larger and larger. Even though their troops didn't have full uniforms, ballistic vests, or weapons with special sights, they were able to make progress in their battles. They climbed the slopes to drive the Saudi mercenaries from the hilltops and take over the advantageous positions. The thrown grenades followed the usual strategy to break enemy resistance and keep the soldiers pinned down in the face of the Houthi advance. One of the rebels stood in front of the stone wall, unloading all his ammunition in automatic mode. Knowing there were still enemies inside, they tried to set the bunker on fire. Unable to end the resistance, the RPGs began their shots. Those positions were first weakened by the snipers. They disguised themselves among the rocks, starting to aim at the more distracted men who were watching the mountains and roads. The scope focused on their heads, transmitting to the sniper's eye the precise spot to finish off yet another soldier. The wicked shots took down the men one by one, trying to help their fallen friends. It was commendable, but not the smartest action, since the scope remained on the men, trying to take down as many enemies as possible. The Houthi troops had tanks that bombarded the enemy bases, and the buildings were of no help. In these cases, the shots destroyed everything the soldiers had, and they didn't have weapons to fight back. At that moment, captured helicopters were used to deliver supplies to the captured positions, which allowed them to consolidate their positions on the border. The Saudi coalition had been facing problems in these battles for some time. Disputes in the American Congress halted the sale of weapons. The Saudi forces had already hit several civilian targets, and the Americans became irritated with their weapons being used in yet another of these scandals. Meanwhile, the Saudi F-15s worked to take down the kamikaze drones flying through the skies, searching for oil production centers. Certainly the Saudis liked it. When the Houthis, dissatisfied with internal problems, decided to look for more challenges, they started attacking ships in the Red Sea. It all started after they declared war against Israel due to the invasion of Gaza. Drones were launched against the new enemy, some being intercepted and others hitting their targets. Still unsatisfied, they began to hijack ships connected to Israelis in the Red Sea, one of the main commercial routes in the world. They began with these targets, but later ships from other nations were struck. The United States and England decided to intervene, creating a coalition to defend the region. The Houthis soon announced that they had attacked American ships, and the response was the launch of missiles and airstrikes against more than 36 targets. The planes took off from the aircraft carriers and began their attacks. Among the selected regions, the attacks targeted locations associated with Houthi weapons storage facilities, missile launcher systems, air defense systems, and radars. Tomahawk missiles were one of the weapons used, with warheads of more than 150 kilotons of trinitrotoluene. Satellite images showed that many of the targets were hit with precision. One indication was that behind all the Houthi attacks there was Iranian influence. It made the forces supporting the Middle East start constant conflicts against American bases in an apparent attempt to escalate the conflict in the region. By February 2024, nothing had been resolved. Authorities from much of the world were concerned about the problem, about the trade routes, or about the Houthis threatening to cut communication cables that connected Europe to Asia. Maybe the lack of internet would lead to marches and protests to end the war and prevent thousands of children from continuing to die from hunger and fire.